Seventh period. Some video notes just for you because you're that special to me. And I don't want you to fall behind my other two classes. All right, so as I mentioned to you guys yesterday, I've got two slides coming up here for you. And we'll get us just one step closer so that when we get back together next Tuesday, we'll be able to start into the story of how this revolution ends up rolling out. Okay. So this will be kind of the last of all the background information that we're going to focus on. Alrighty. This is where we left off. We had introduced you to King Louis XVI and his wife Marie Antoinette and their official portraits there after they had been serving as the monarchs for a while. All right. And so I'm going to start you off here. There's one more person I want to introduce to you to go along with the king and the queen. And that is this gentleman by the name of Maximilien Robespierre. Okay, it's a French name there for you if there is one. And a little bit about him here. There we go. There's Mr. Robespierre. And he's going to be an interesting story through the whole kind of French Revolution experience. He'll be an example of how people sometimes change once they get a taste of political power. All right. It's one of those things that I don't know what I would be like if suddenly I was like thrust into a position where I had, power and control over people. Would I be a really good ruler? Would I go all absolutist like King Louis? What would I be like? And I think we'll come back to this as we work our way through the story. But Robespierre, you've got the information there. He is kind of a rarity because he is born into almost, I won't say the complete total peasant class, but he is born to a family that cannot afford to educate him, things like that. Through his own hard work, he is able to eventually pay for his own education, and has, is just a very, very ambitious person who has a vision of himself, and so becomes very, very successful as a courtroom lawyer in France, and eventually is going to find himself with everything going on in France, finding himself taking on the role of a politician. All right, something he may not, as a young person, really have ever expected. We talked about with King Louis, it was, if you didn't have anyone else to in front of you, an older brother or something like that, you knew it was coming someday. And you knew you were, if you only had one older brother in front of you, you knew you were like one potential accident, sickness, heart attack, whatever away, and boom, you were going to have power and you were going to be the ultimate politician, the king. And with Robespierre, that is going to be a little bit of a story here that those expectations obviously didn't exist in someone who was born to a family that didn't have money, wasn't poor. All right. The picture, by the way, over there on the left side that just popped up, that was taken off of a death mask of Robespierre. Sometimes way back here, back in the days before photography, people sometimes had really some kind of like morbid kind of things that they did when people died. People had different ways of memorializing people when they died. And after Robespierre dies, they make a cast of his face. There's other people that you know. George Washington had a death mask made after he passed away. Abraham Lincoln had a death mask made of his face after he was assassinated. And when we see the casts that come off of those, I guess it gives us a little bit of more of an idea what these people looked like in an age before there was cameras or film or anything like that. So you see that picture, and if you look closely, if it kind of shows through my video here, that his skin is really like pocked and full of looks like little holes and craters all over the place. And that was very common for a lot of people back in France and other countries back during that time, because people would catch cases of smallpox that maybe weren't bad enough to kill, but would leave these little bumps all over your face that would scab over and then would scar your face. And so, you can look at it and go, oh, that's just hideous looking. But at the same time, a lot of the people back then would have potentially had an appearance that looked kind of the same. Women would, use a lot of like foundation and stuff to try that, were of higher class, would use a lot of foundation and stuff to try to camouflage that and mask it. But, for men, I mean, it's kind of like, well, I am what I am. So, you've got the pretty painting of him over there on the right side, and what he might have really looked a little bit more like in reality over there on the left. Okay, and then you've got the other information there, B, as far as not only is he a lawyer, but he is a voracious reader, and it's through that reading that he becomes exposed to guys like Jean-Jacques Rousseau and those Enlightenment thinkers. Remember, Rousseau was the one that writes a lot about equality and injustice, and the fact that, in effect, that there really shouldn't be absolutist kings who have that kind of power. And Maximilien Robespierre is going to be a guy who, like it says there, what he reads is going to make a really deep imprint on his mind and really influence the way that he looks at France and looks at the king. All right. So we'll get more on him later on as we go a little further on in the story. All right. Okay. Now we're going to talk about the French population and kind of like French society. This is kind of staying with our habit of, a lot of places that we've studied, whether it was back there in China or whether it was in Middle Ages in Europe, whether it was in the Renaissance. And we've looked at how societies were split up. We've looked at a number of these pyramids like this, where we're looking at people. Now in France, like it says there, they, instead of having classes, upper class, middle class, lower class, things like that, they had what they called the 3 estates. All right. And you got the population there around the time of the French Revolution, right around approximately about 25 million. And those 3 estates, this will be something I'll expect you to kind of know the difference between them and how they kind of also add up in terms of the numbers. Okay. I might not demand that you know the exact numbers, but just kind of an idea of, roughly how much of the first estate represents the full population, and kind of right on down the line from there. Okay, so up at the very, very top. Now, first of all, like the royalty, okay, the monarchy, they're not even part of this. Right, they're not even part of this at all. They're above all. And so when we look at the first estate, it's made up mainly of the top officials of the church. Okay, and mainly we are talking still about the Catholic Church, although there's we have those Calvinists in France as well, and so they could get lumped in with some of this also. But those people who are the bishops and the people who are up near the very top, the cardinals and some of the top leadership, there's only about 130,000 of them in France, and they make up the first estate. Okay. The second estate are going to be people who are kind of the wealthy people in France, right? People who either are born to really good families, and it's kind of like, they're set up for life from the minute they're born anyway, to at least live a pretty decent life, right, or wealthy life. They might not be able to live the kind of life that the monarchy, the absolute monarchs do, but still, it's a good life. Aristocrats, which means, again, definitely their wealth comes from their family. It's kind of passed along from generation to generation. And so, these people that, have the advantages and the privileges. And again, out of 25 million, only 350,000 of them. So the one thing I want you to think about is the first estate and the second estate represent a tiny percentage of the overall population of France. Okay, there are not many people at the very, very top of that pyramid there that are being able to enjoy all the benefits. All right, you can guess where I'm going with the third estate. And that's pretty much, that's everyone else. Okay, some of them are going to be the middle class. And the word that the French use to describe them is what you see there. And we could play the guessing game if I was with you to see if you could figure out how to pronounce that word. But, because you're getting them here in the video notes, we don't have to worry about that. That is pronounced bourgeoisie. Bourgeoisie, right? And those of the middle class, all right? Like probably me and probably a lot of you and your families would be considered the bourgeoisie. And then right on down to the working class, the peasants that work on the farms and all that sort of thing, they are make up the rest of the French population. Okay, and here's the last part is an important one. Okay, if I zip back here really quick, can I do that on here? Oh, I'll probably mess things up if I can. I do that? Yeah, here we go. You know, the first estate and the second estate were barely taxed anything at all. Right? I mean, here they are. They're the richest people. They're the people who can most easily afford to pay taxes. Yet the French government takes a position of, because you are so wealthy and so privileged, one of the rewards you get for that is you don't have to pay anything in taxes, or hardly anything in taxes. Instead, they take this position that that's what we'll use the rest of the population to do. All right. So you see this cartoon from back during the time of the French Revolution, and it's making fun of, or maybe just trying to make a point about that, you know, this poor old guy you see all bent over here with these two fancy dudes riding on his back. That's the third estate. Okay. And the guy you see all dressed in black, that's the first estate. That's one of your clergymen, one of your, you know, members of the church. And then one of those aristocrats or nobles being the other one. And they're trying to make that point that, you know, it's the poorest people of the country that are having to hold up the wealthiest, and just what is so nonsensical about that? Because, well, you know, when I'm back with you next week, if you think you can explain why that would make sense to have, you know, the poorest people try to hold up everything in your society, you give it a try with me, and I'll more likely be able to prove you wrong. Okay. And so, yeah, and the French people who are in the third estate, they know it. You know, this isn't like a secret, you know, that's kept from them. They know we pay a bunch of taxes. The wealthy and rich people do not, and we're expected just, you know, to just deal with this system. You know, you try to raise your voice about it, you're probably going to get beat down by, you know, police or military or something like that. And so you just have to kind of go along with it. All right. Okay, and then we'll finish off this slide by taking a look at some other inspiration to go along with the Enlightenment. Okay, because again, well, I'll remind you of that here in a moment. All right, I've already mentioned this before, but let's make sure we get this in the notes here. All right, our American Revolution over here was huge in a lot of different ways. Obviously, it was huge because it creates the United States of America, all right? You know, that Declaration of Independence, it's the first time you're going to see those words written out that way, United States of America. And so this country that, you know, starts out very weak, that grows to become a superpower within a couple of centuries, is a huge result of, you know, this revolution that takes place that the French help out with, all right? But there's another lesson that comes out of that as well. And that is the new government that is set up after the American Revolution does not include a king or a queen. We deliberately set up a government that does not have a monarchy because we suffered under a king, and why we broke away and why we fought our war of independence. All right. And so, yeah, we set up a government that has three branches, and they kind of check on each other and check each other's power. We have our legislative branch, which is our Congress. We have our judicial branch, which is our court system. And we have the executive branch. And we end up deciding to go with a president as the person who's going to lead, and a president who has a lot of controls on how much power they can have. All right. Because we did not want to end up back under the control of an all-powerful king, because that we suffered so much in the years before we revolted and went to war. So this sends out a message to other people all over the world that you can function without a king. All right, you don't have to have a king in order for your country to be able to operate. And as the United States of America begins to show that, you know, right after the war and after we set up our government, that it doesn't completely fail right away and that it can actually function, it's like it's an example, you know, to the world. Hey, if you have a king and you're not happy with them, well, one option you have is to do what we did, right? And so that is going to inspire a lot of those third estate people. You know, they're going to be looking, and it's kind of like, we know about this war because in some cases our sons and husbands went over there and helped the Americans win that war. But, why maybe what they did over there would work in France, right? That's going to be an inspiration. And then the other one is just a reminder of the one that you've already been introduced to, all right? And that is the Enlightenment. And even a lot of peasants and middle class people who don't do a lot of reading will be introduced to at least the basic ideas that come out of some of those Enlightenment thinkers and writers like Jean-Jacques Rousseau, right? Same guy that really influences and inspires Maximilien Robespierre will also end up inspiring a lot of these people who will eventually are going to rise up against their king. And when we get back into this next week, we're going to get specifically into the story about exactly how they do that. Okay, how do they organize themselves, and how do they go about the job of kicking a king out of his job? All right, but that will be waiting for us later on. Okay, got that taken care of in less than 16 minutes. All right, pretty close. All right. So you make sure you have that down. You make sure that, hopefully some of what I gave you gives you some left column kind of business. If not, make some questions to go along with it. And make sure you have these ready to go because, like I said, when I get back together with you on Tuesday next week, we're right back to it. All right? We'll see you then. Have a good weekend.